Several arrests were made after the Capitol Hill riots, including a man arrested and charged with having nearly a dozen Molotov cocktails. Ingredients. He'll be in federal court today. Plus, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser asked federal officials to cancel permits for demonstrations and plan to protect federal property around Inauguration Day. Does this go against our First Amendment rights? As many legal cases progress, there are many questions regarding rights and what action Congress can take to remove the president. So a lot going on here. We had to bring in some legal heavyweights. And joining us now for a discussion, George Washington Law Professor Paul Schiff Berman and Georgetown Law Professor Frederick Lawrence. Appreciate both of your times. Mr. Lawrence, I want to start with you, first of all, because I know that one of your areas of expertise is free expression. A lot of people, you've been hearing the First Amendment thrown around a lot, whether it's freedom of speech or freedom of assembly. Are people taking this too far by essentially saying we can go and say whatever we want?
You can, largely speaking, say whatever you want. What you can't do is incite violence. That's where you cross the line. The expression of this that most people go back to, Louis Brandeis about 100 years ago famously said that the answer to bad speech is more speech. But people forget how that expression started. The first thing he says is, in the absence of incitement of imminent violence. So when you have incitement of imminent violence, that can actually be precluded. So that's what the issues are right now, is what's going on. Speech that is incitement of violence. So
for anyone, and I'll stick with you for a second here, Mr. Lawrence, for anyone who may have been involved in the incidents here in Washington last week, who might say, I was within my rights to say certain things or to be in certain places, is it a defense?
Sure, it's certainly a defense to say that they were not advocating violence. And to be clear, we start with a presumption in favor of free speech. We don't start by restricting speech in our society. We start with a presumption in favor of speech. So there's a perfectly good argument to say I was there arguing for certain things or discussing certain things or even protesting Congress. The problem is when it crosses the line and when you hear lots of talk about fight, when you hear talk about combat, that's when the bells go off that maybe we've got something else going on here.
All right, let's bring in Paul Schiff Berman. Look, in the legal community, almost anything can be subject to interpretation. Would you agree with your colleague there, or do you have a different take on where the limit is when it comes to free speech and assembly?
I would agree with Fred. The incitement test that the Supreme Court has used talks about incitement to imminent lawless action. And so certainly the people who undertook lawless action, trespassed, attacked police, vandalized things, that's not speech at all. But those who specifically incited imminent lawless action are indeed not protected by the First Amendment in what they do. I would also add that none of that is necessarily relevant with regard to the impeachment question, because impeachment isn't strictly speaking, a criminal prosecution. And so whatever standard the Supreme Court uses with regard to a criminal prosecution or even a civil case that could be brought against someone who is inciting violence is not relevant to the impeachment question.
All right, I want to come back to, let me come back to that in just 1 second. I want to get back to Fred Lawrence real quick for one last question when it comes to the First Amendment. We have already heard from the mayor of D.C. saying that she wants to essentially revoke any permit that has already been issued for Inauguration Day. Does a government official have the right to do that, to say we don't want you here?
The major rule you're going to ask is the same rule being applied to everybody? It's a content neutral rule. If she says for reasons of security, we have to have no permits in a particular place on a particular time, we're closing this down, she's allowed to do that. She's got to be careful when she does that. She can't just willy-nilly say we're going to close down public parks. But if she's got a specific security-related reason to close it down to everybody, she can do that. But again, you got to be careful. You can't say only this side can attend, but the other side can't. It's got to be a content-neutral rule to do that.
All right, Paul, I want to come back to you for one last thing, and I want to tap into your expertise here with the Supreme Court, because you did clerk for the court. You mentioned the prospect here when it comes to potentially removing the president from office. One of the other aspects here is the president has said, and I realize that this is completely different, but the president has said that he plans to potentially, those in the inner circle, he might self-pardon himself. Is that something? It's never happened before. Is it enforceable? Could that go to the Supreme Court? What is the end result of that procedure if it happens?
Well, as you point out, it's never happened before, so it has not been litigated and courts have not weighed in. I think most constitutional scholars who have looked at the history and context of the pardon power and also simply the linguistic word pardon have concluded that you can't pardon yourself, that it is something that is bestowed on someone else. And of course, the founders didn't want to create royal-like power. And so although it allows for pardoning somebody else, I think it probably doesn't allow pardoning of oneself.
Sure. Let me jump in real quick because we're running out of time real quick, but a quick follow-up to that. And I agree, it would have to be tested. Would a pardon, though, would it offer protection against an impeachment?
It certainly doesn't offer any protection against impeachment. It also doesn't offer any protection against potential state prosecutions, either in New York or potentially in Georgia. It would only provide security against federal criminal prosecution.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there for now. Appreciate both of your time this morning as we have enjoyed the conversation with law professor Paul Schiff Berman from George Washington and Frederick Lawrence from Georgetown. Thanks much.